Thanks for joining this webinar on the Data Quality Index. We're talking today about the data quality methodology, data completeness. So this is the second in our series of webinars, so thanks for joining. I'm sure a few of you had joined the first one, but I think we have some new faces as well in the room. So we'll kind of reiterate the goal of the Data Quality Index, and then we'll go a little bit also into explaining more about the methodology for this section of the consultation on data completeness. We'll also have a short amount of time at the end for questions and answers. So please, hold those till the end, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So my name is Anna Whitson. I think most of the people in the room, but I'm the Outreach and Partnership Specialist for the IATI Secretariat based in New York at UNDP. And my colleague Amy, who many of you know, will also be kind of joining in the presentation later on today. So I think we'll just jump right in. Next slide, please. Just a few kind of housekeeping notes. One is that we're going to be recording today's meeting. So I think we've already started the recording in the English chat, the English room, but we are going to also be recording in the French and Spanish rooms as well. So if my colleagues wouldn't mind starting those recordings if they haven't already. So, it would be really helpful also to make sure that you have your Zoom name displayed with your name and organization, so we kind of know who's in the room and who we're chatting to as well. And as I said, we do have live interpretation. So if you are more comfortable listening in French or Spanish, please do switch over to those interpretation channels. You can see a quick photo here of how to do that at the bottom. Just click on that interpretation and you'll be able to access those. And as I said, at the end, we're going to have some time for some questions and answers, some clarifications, a short amount of time at the end. So if you do have any questions as going through the presentations, please go ahead and put those in the chat box or raise your hand, and make sure to come to you at the end of the kind of presentation part of the session. So maybe we'll just go to the next slide now. And we first just kind of wanted to provide a little bit of background about the need for increased data quality. So actually, we'll go to the next slide. That's my introduction already. So where did the DQI come from, the Data Quality Index? Obviously, many of you were involved in the drafting of our 2020 to 2025 IATI strategic plan, which was really communally developed with the membership, publishers, data users, all of you in the room. And that strategic plan really recognizes data quality as really, really key to IATI's progress going forward, and especially key as an enabler of data use. So when we had the results framework working group of members coming together, trying to figure out, how do we translate that strategic plan into measurable targets, this is something that they had requested, revised data quality measures in a really easy to understand and easy to digest format. So the idea of the Data Quality Index really came from this group of members. And so now, we as the Secretariat are taking it forward in consultation with the entirety of the IATI community to kind of formulate what that looks like as a data quality index, and to make sure the methodology is fit for purpose and is fair and serves a variety of stakeholders. So the goal really of this DQI, this data quality index, is to educate and incentivize publishers to improve the quality of the data that they publish. So obviously targeting a lot more at the political level, as well as at a higher kind of decision-making level, where this is a really easy to understand, easy to digest metric that we can use to incentivize better performance. So we'll go to the next slide. So what do we want to do with this consultation with you members of the community? We want to reach agreement on these new metrics. So, we're revising our data quality metrics on what good quality data looks like. So that's the first part of this consultation process, is what do we mean by good quality data? Is it different for different stakeholder groups? What does it really look like for IATI? And then, as I said, to agree this revised data quality, this set of data quality measures for all IATI publishers, and to really roll those up into this new IATI Data Quality Index. So again, the intention here is to drive change, to educate, use it as an advocacy tool to improve the quality and usability of the data. I wanted to talk a little bit about the consultation process. So you would have heard this last time, but just so we're all on the same page about the consultation process for developing the DQI. So what you're seeing on your screen is kind of the dates and the phases for what we've done already, and then also what's upcoming and planned. So the first phase of the consultation took place in late 2021, and it focused on which additional data quality measures should be implemented, which should be kept, any amendments that we needed, any additions that we needed. So measures were proposed for timeliness, data availability, which is now called data completeness, validation, data complementarity, and trust. So there was a lot of positive support for these new measures of data complementarity and trust, but really the community was recognizing them as being quite ambitious, but a bit vague as well. So we're needing a little bit more thought to go into what we should be measuring and why under data complementarity and trust. So these were actually removed for now, and we're hoping to address them in a future iteration of the Data Quality Index. So another future area of work is really how to display the index so it's relevant for different publisher types and sectors. So for instance, humanitarian elements are of use primarily to organizations in the humanitarian field, of course. So for now, we're actually going to be addressing that in the weights and measures section of phase 2, which you'll see here on your screen will take place in May and June of this year. So we recognize that a lot more work will be needed to figure out how to weight and measure different components of the Data Quality Index. So as you'll see here, we've completed this phase 1. We've completed the first part of phase 2, which was on timeliness and validation, which many of you participated in. And we're now focusing on the data completeness section. So that's what we're here to talk about today. And we'll be finishing up the consultation later this year with the weights and measures section. And after that, the next steps obviously are kind of UX testing and actually building the data quality index itself, with a lot of input in that weights and measures section on what that looks like. So just to say, everything we've done so far, the full summary will be available on Connect. We're working on putting together the summary for timeliness and validation, which will be available in the next few days. As I said, we'll be going on into data completeness for the next few weeks, followed by weights and measures. Everything is taking place via IATI Connect. So we really appreciate your comments here today, but hopefully you can also put those on IATI Connect so others can see them and respond to them, hopefully. The way we're kind of handling each consultation section is, releasing the papers, releasing the information, the methodology, and having one of these webinars to kind of answer any questions that you might have, to be able to then really, put some, thoughtful comments onto Connect for others to be able to engage with as well. So that's kind of the plan so far for our process so far. So I think I will go to the next section, which is the last section for me, which is just a little bit of an overview on how to engage in the consultation itself. We showed this last time around, but just to give you a little bit of a demo of IATI Connect. So Andy, if you could stop sharing your screen, perfect. And I will share mine and just quickly run you through what this looks like. And I will show you here. So many of you I hope everyone can see my screen. I think it's good. So thumbs down me if anyone has issues here. But yeah, so this is obviously our platform, IATI Connect. A lot of you are very familiar with this. This is our community platform where we're hosting all of our discussions. You don't need to have an account to be able to see content at iaticonnect.org, but you do need to have an account if you want to engage with content, meaning you want to make a comment, you want to tag someone, you want to, to kind of like provide actual feedback. It's a really quick process, quick sign up. But once you go to our main page, you'll see here, this is where the Data Quality Index consultation is housed right here on our main page. So once you click here, we'll actually go right here to the main consultation page. So this will look familiar from the first phase, but really it's the data completeness subsections are broken up here with the methodology detailed in each one and space to provide comments as well. So if you click into each section, what you're going to see is the specific methodology for this section. So for instance, on the data completeness mandatory and recommended, you'll see here the methodology. You can scroll down. It's quite robust, obviously. And then you'll see guiding questions here. So this is really what we're interested in hearing from the community on. Of course, we're not limited to commenting on that, but these are the kind of questions formulated by the Secretariat that we thought would be really useful to hear from you on. And at the bottom, looks like Michelle already responded to this one. Thanks, Michelle. You can hear just like a Facebook feed kind of setup. You can provide your comments. You can also like people's comments. You can tag by using an @ sign and typing in their name. So pretty straightforward process, and then you just hit comment. But again, you could say, if I wanted to reply to Michelle, I could do that here. So I think we're all really familiar with this. Again, it's very much like kind of a Facebook feed. But again, we're really looking for all comments to be entered on Connect so that they're parent, and then we can have conversation between each other. So I think I will stop sharing now. And that's the end of my little spiel. So hopefully that was useful. And then I will hand over to my colleague Amy now to take us through a bit more of the detailed methodology and to answer any questions you might have on that. So over to you, Amy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Anna, rather, sorry. And good to see the rest of you on this call. As Anna mentioned, we're going to be going through, the different metrics that make up data completeness. And if you are aware of the IATI dashboard as it currently is, a lot of these are going to be very recognizable. It builds upon what the dashboard already captures, looking at more what is useful context, what are useful categorizations, largely for data quality and particularly for data users. So this is very much about what is actually being published and does it have the right sub-elements and attributes included. For the start of this, it's good to note that once again, we want to look at data completeness measures for activities that are active only. And I know there's been some discussion on Connect about what is an active activity. In simple terms, we would say from our side is that it has a start date before or on today's date and an end date in the future. And there is some clarification that's needed there. The IATI standard does not allow for actual start dates to be, actual end dates to be in the future. However, we know that IATI publishers are not following this rule. Therefore, there are a number of activities which do have actual start dates for the future. And then there is a balance question of, do we include these within our metrics or do we exclude them based on organizations not following activity date logic? Our view is that we do include them within the capture of if activity is active or not, but actually that logic can come in when we begin to assess how start dates are being published. So that's one to bear in mind. If you'd like to engage in that conversation, do so on Connect. And if you've got other ideas, particularly for the methodology, then please do let us know. So moving on to the first metric. This is on mandatory and recommended data. Similar to the current dashboard, it's looking if all the mandatory elements that are needed in IATI, and this is the top level mandatory elements, have been included. And how we want to increase that is going, actually, are these following the rules within IATI? We can check this using the IATI validator. So it will definitely follow schema validation, but then also, are they covering the rules? And there is the question here under activity date, how strict we want to be on this. At the moment, we are following the first rule, which is just, is there a planned or an actual start date? And into this, we can very much add, and actually the actual end date must not be in the future. So do let us know your thoughts on that one, and that's where we can capture that piece of logic. On the next slide is about the recommended elements. And similar to mandatory, it's going to have the ones that we have recommended, which would be countries and or regions, inclusion of budgets, and inclusion of transactions. Are they there? The one thing to note on this is we would be asking for there to be a transaction that has at least a value of greater than 0 for one transaction. Transactions of 0 can be published, but they're not particularly meaningful by themselves. Therefore, that's why we're looking for that. And we've also noted that budgets don't have to be present based on, say, if it's humanitarian, if you're using the budget not provided attribute. But where budgets are present, we also want to have one to have a value greater than 0. On to classification, and there are quite a few different metrics under classification. 2 of which are the OECD DAC sectors. This follows the same logic that's on the current IATI dashboard, and within that we've included the different rules, such as the summing of percentages up to 100 for each vocabulary. And you can either have it at activity or transaction level. The other one we've added in is the policy markers. Once again, same as the current IATI dashboard, looking for the OECD DAC policy markers, as well as a significance code. There was a question that came up before about if we wanted to further disaggregate that, looking at particular policy markers, but this could be a future edition if it's useful, and one to comment on if you have particular views. The next set of classification results, if we can go to that slide, are looking at A type, finance type, and flow types. So once again, these are particularly useful for data users who are looking at finances. And we are proposing here to add in the check that there is at least one valid aid finance flow type for each category at the default level, or they are present for each of the transactions. This is not something that's included within the IATI schema, but it does make it much more useful for data users if this data is present. So we are proposing to add that in. It follows the logic of countries, regions, of languages, of currencies that are already inherent within IATI. But this is very much an addition that goes beyond the current standard. So do let us know your thoughts on that one, please. And on to the next slide. The next one in classification is looking at sustainable development goals. This is something that we've not captured before. And we are proposing to just look for the presence of either a sustainable development goal or target within the tag element. So during the Sustainable Development Goal consultation that happened a few years ago, it was decided that upon the tag element is the best place to capture this data. It is not the only place to capture this data in IATI. You can also use it under sectors and you can use it under results. But at what was agreed in the guidance is that if you're using it under sectors or under results, then you should also be doing it under tag. And what this allows for is that the burden of kind of putting that into the tag becomes on the publisher rather than on the data user who has to go hunting for this data. So that is included in there. But the question for you is, should both tag and sector be considered? Do we want to continue following the guidance that was agreed by the working group that actually it should be done in both? And if only in one, then it should be at the tag level. And on to the next metric, just looking at identifiers and traceability. So this is very much an expansion of what has previously gone before. So reporting organization identifier, this is checking if reporting organization identifier matches the one on the IATI registry. This is used throughout a number of different IATI tools at the moment, and is one that we want to continue capturing. The ones that are additions are looking at participating organization identifiers and the participating organization activity IDs. And we are not at the stage where we can take, analyze organizations' data and say, is this organization identifier, is this activity ID correct? Is it already in existence within IATI? And there are various different reasons for that we can continue to discuss. So what would be good to discuss is what logic can we add to identify whether these organization identifiers, these activity IDs, are possibly valid or are they possibly useful? And that could be something along the lines of, it should start with a prefix already on org ID's code list. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts, particularly ideas of how to capture this one in a way that is sustainable and it's proportionate. It would be good to hear further views. Moving on to the next slide. So this one is similar, but this time looking at the transaction provider and receiver org identifiers. Within IATI guidance, it's been agreed that we are particularly interested in the provider organization for any form of funds coming into an organization, whether that's commitments, whether that's incoming funds. And likewise, we're particularly interested in the details of receiver organizations for funds that are flowing out of an organization. And this is the split you can see here on the screen, where we have divided the different transaction types into those that are they're kind of flowing in and those that are flowing out. One of the questions for the community is what transaction types should be captured and measured? Do we want to be doing this for all forms of transactions? Or actually, are there some that should be skipped from this assessment? So please do look over and let us know your views. On to the next slide. So moving on to finances. So first one is looking at transaction types. And we want to see what type of transactions organizations are including in their data. The ones that are key to our data users are incoming funds, outgoing commitments, and spend. So we want to look at the number of activities that contain each of these. The second one is value date. And value dates tend to be used for how do you convert the currency of that transaction. And we tend to do this via the value date. So questions for the community on these are, should these assessments only apply to activities with no child activities? And this is the issue surrounding hierarchies in IATI data, where we have programs with sub-activities. And it's largely the view that actually it's the child activities that are going to be containing the financial data. So we'd expect to have budgets and transactions for activities that spend actually happen in. So including a number of these different projects is going to disproportionately affect organizations who have this hierarchical structure. One way to look at this is we could either look at the hierarchy's attribute, or actually we could assess to see, actually, does an activity have a child activity? And if it does, and then we exclude it from the assessment, as we know the hierarchy attribute isn't used particularly consistently between organizations. The other one to note for the value date is what is a time period that is sensible here. We've proposed that it's going to, value date should be a month within a transaction. But actually, are there reasons why this should be extended, why this should be shortened? It would be good to hear your views on this. Moving on to the next one, looking at budgets. Thanks, Andy. This is also one that we're looking to expand upon from the previous IATI dashboard. We want to see if budgets are provided for the whole activity period. Currently, the IATI dashboard just says, is there a budget per year? That is per calendar year of an activity. Whereas the methodology here will look at what are the total number of days within an activity, and what are the total number of days covered by a budget. That will most likely be multiple budgets for activities of greater than a year in length, and do they cover the same time period? So the output of this would be a percentage, going yes, say 80% or 100% of this activity is covered by a budget, rather than a yes-no output. And this percentage would then be aggregated across all active activities. It'd be good to hear your thoughts on if this measure is appropriate, or you think there are better ways of capturing this data. And one thing to note on this is we would include both values, budgets with positive values, and also budgets of zero value. And this is because we know that budgets of zero value often happen at the end of an activity, once all finance has been dispersed or has been spent and the activity is wrapping up. So for this one, zero value budgets would be allowed within the assessment. On to the next ones, which are humanitarian measures. So under humanitarian, of particularly importance to identifying humanitarian data. It's not one that every organization will be publishing, but where it is publishing, we do want to see what is included within it. So the first one is looking at the proportion of activities, which is useful often for data users to capture. And this is going to be looking at the humanitarian flag, whether or not it's set to true, either at the activity level or the transaction level. And to note here that we're not proposing to use humanitarian sector codes, as the easiest way to find humanitarian data is with the humanitarian flag. On to the next one, please, Andy. So once again, looking at the humanitarian fields, but in this one, we are saying of which humanitarian activities we've identified, how many of them contain humanitarian scope or a humanitarian sector. So we can begin to drill down to see actually which ones are using either of these two, so that we can find details of what kind of humanitarian activity it is. Coming up next is results. Currently, the IATI dashboard just looks for the presence of a results and indicator element and doesn't go any further than this. So we want to keep that measure, but we also want to add in 3 additional ones, looking at whether it has a baseline and has a target and has an actual value been included. To be able to assess progress against results, these 3 are incredibly useful to be used in combination. They can be used in combination with both qualitative and quantitative measures, which means we don't need to exclude any different indicators. So it's looking, is there actual useful data within the results? Is what we are hoping to capture here. On to the next one, which is document links. Once again, this is the document links are partly covered by the IATI dashboard already. Do they have a presence in activity files? We're also proposing to add in, are they present within organization files? And the note on the organization files is
Vemos los archivos de organización que
if a document link is present and 0 if one is not present. However, there is one maybe slight complication is IATI expects and advises organization to only have one organization file per publisher. We know that a number of publishers, for whatever reasons, are publishing multiple organization files. And how do we deal with that? Our proposal is that actually we would not score organizations who have multiple organization files, as this goes against the guidance in IATI. But good to hear your thoughts on this measure and whether or not that's appropriate or how else it could be dealt with. Right, final one is looking at location. This is currently included within the IATI dashboard, but we're just looking for the presence of the location element. This time we're going slightly further, going actually, does the location element contain data that is more likely to be useful? And for that we are proposing to include the POS element, geographic location, name, description, administrative area. If there are others that are useful to data users that you would like to see captured within this measure, then please do let us know. So yeah, should anything else be added to this assessment? That comes to the end of our data completeness measures. We'll now hand over for a time of questions.
Thanks, Amy. I think we just have quite a few questions and comments. I think I'm also having a bit of an internet issue, so apologies if it's coming in and out. If you could just let me know in the chat if you can't hear me. Apologies for that. But I think we have quite a few comments and questions in the chat. I'm just scanning through.
Alors, je vois beaucoup de questions et de commentaires dans le chat.
You also helped last time with going through the questions with our other technical counterparts, so please feel free to come in here as well.
Yeah, happy to sort of, I've been going through the
Sarah, si vous voulez aussi intervenir. Oui, d'accord. Je voulais parler de quelque chose pour Amy et vous répondre. Il y avait une question au début sur la méthodologie pour le type aide. Et ce n'est pas clair selon la description. Est-ce que peut-être le vocabulaire peut être considéré sur la qualité? Donc, est-ce qu'il faut un type de code? Sur un code de type d'aide pour chaque vocabulaire, est-ce que ça suggère que ça a été utilisé? Non, on n'implique pas qu'il faut utiliser un. Il faut la présence d'un type d'aide. Voilà. Merci pour ceci. Donc, on va essayer de modifier ceci pour que ça soit plus clair. OK. Je vois aussi sur les types d'aide et les types financiers, sur les types de flux. Et évidemment, on pensait qu'il y avait pas mal de discussions là-dessus. Merci de mettre ceci sur Connect. Selon ma perspective, il faut faire la différence entre les éditeurs et les utilisateurs de données selon les besoins. Mais je pense que oui, on veut considérer ceci et en discuter. Un type financier, c'est essentiel pour utiliser par pays et par gouvernement. S'ils ne savent pas si c'est un prêt, c'est difficile d'analyser les données et de l'utiliser pour des processus nationaux. Donc, ce qui est très important, ceci. Et bien sûr, pour le type d'aide, comprendre est-ce que c'est un soutien de projet ou pour le budget, différentes catégorisations, c'est très, très important. Et aussi, ça a été demandé par certains gouvernements, mais c'est le moins important des trois. Donc, on essaye donc d'améliorer la qualité et c'est très important. Chaque fois que je soutiens un gouvernement, je vois que le type financier n'est pas là et c'est embêtant. Donc, c'est toujours une lutte. Je veux juste clarifier. Aussi, il y a un commentaire sur les ODD, les données ODD. Ah, Michel, pardon. Désolée, moi j'ai des problèmes d'ordinateur. Et merci beaucoup pour avoir organisé ceci. Ma question peut être très indicative du fait que ce n'est pas mon espace. Mais quand vous avez dit, Sarah, sur les gouvernements qui doivent savoir si c'est un prêt par rapport à une subvention, est-ce que c'est un problème qui est latéral directement à eux? Parce que prétendons que le CADA donne de l'argent et qu'on l'envoie à un implémentateur et ensuite à un pays. Mon défi, pas seulement sur le financier, mais pour les flux, si ça commence avec ODA du côté du Canada, à moins que je dise que le Canada, c'était de l'ODA, eh bien, après, c'est perdu dans la ligne. Et plus on va loin, ça va loin du donateur qui sait et qui a besoin de savoir la classification du type d'ODA et aussi si c'est type financier. Si le Canada prend de l'argent à l'IOM, eh bien, l'argent, c'est vraiment lorsque le gouvernement lui-même doit rembourser l'argent par rapport où est-ce que, oh, j'ai de l'argent comme un prêt et puis je la donne à un implémentateur. Et je ne sais pas si c'est possible. Est-ce que c'est donc du financement bilatéral plutôt que quand vous avez des gens intermédiaires avec l'ONU, etc.?
No, I mean, that definitely makes sense. Like, I think you're right in the sense that, like, of course, like, like that it's largely needed from bilateral organizations, and most actually report it, right? So, like, just to give the example of Nigeria, like when we were going through all of that data, like, and trying to like clean up the data and figure out like and assign finance types, like most of the ones that didn't have it were NGOs, right? You can assume for the most part that those are grants. There was one large bilateral donor, which I won't name, but like, that did not have finance type, and you couldn't assume what it was, right? So but I think that the challenge with IATI sometimes is that like you have these multiple entities within the chain that are reporting this information, but that information is not connected in any way. So when a data user looks at this information, they're not going to be able to connect the dots necessarily between what an organization provided to the next organization, right? So then if that information is not provided by each organization, then you have to make certain assumptions about what the, like what you assign to that. And like, I mean, like in this case, I mean, I think it's a pretty logical assumption to assume an NGO is not providing a loan to the government. So I suggested that was probably an okay assumption, right? But you want to reduce the amount of assumptions that you're making, and when it's not specified in the as part of the standard or something like that, right? So I think like while like you're not really able to connect these flows or connect these organizations in a structured, like consistent way, like it then creates need for this information at every step, if that makes sense.
It does.
So
And sorry to interrupt there, but I think that's why, and Johanna had made a point in here about there being so much in this, but then this speaks to why the traceability element is so important. Because then if you don't know what the flow type is, if you can at least trace through the chain, and that, you know, my grant from Canada is identified in a way that if I don't have the flow type, but I'm tracing back to Canada's publish, they can go for it there. So this gets into the weights and measures, which I know is not this consultation, but this is also why, you know, I'm a strong proponent of, you know, the weights and measures, and we'll get there, and bifurcating things, because totally get that a donor government is going to need to say what it is. I just think just adding it into the file, because it's not there, we run the risk of getting it wrong. I mean, I've had donors, and I mentioned this in the Connect. I've had a donor specifically say, this is not ODA, do not publish it to IATI. Now I explained to them that IATI isn't just about ODA, but I would have never known that it wasn't ODA, because you know, so and I'm right next to the donor, so it's hard for us to know. And if, you know, well, that I won't keep going on, but it just makes it a challenge. And I can only imagine my implementing partners. If it's not in my contract telling me this is ODA or this is not ODA, I'm going to be making guesses, and then the quality gets even less valuable. But I can stop there.
I mean, I think that these are very valid points that we need to definitely consider. And I think that there's quite a distinction between, you know, like the ability to provide quality information for perhaps finance type versus aid type versus flow type, right? So like to your example just now. So I think rather than thinking about these all as the same, like thinking about them individually and maybe adjusting accordingly will be important. So I think all things that, you know, we need to think about and consider. Sorry, I don't want to miss any other hands. I think there was a comment in the chat about the use of the tag and sector for the SDG information. So let me just read the comment. So it says, since the IATI standard proposes both data elements at the tag and sector for publishing SDG information, we think that the publisher should be able to choose under which of these elements to publish SDG data. If sector is published using SDG vocabulary, it should be counted as good quality data, even if the SDG tag is not published. I'll let you respond to this one first, Amy. I know we had some discussions on this one as well.
Yeah, I think on that one, that is what we would like to hear further views on from data users, from publishers. We have currently aligned the methodology to the IATI guidance. And this is a way of, are we going ahead and trying to enforce that guidance through the Data Quality Index and saying, nope, we still believe that it is important to ease the burden of data use for our data users by saying we want everything in tag and this is a push towards it. Or actually, are we saying that we are more happy to have that burden to be on the data users to pull in that data from sectors as well as tags. And I think that is one that we would like to hear more views on from different organizations across the IATI community as we build this data quality index.
If I can jump in. Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I figured I'd take that lull. It's interesting. I was part of the SDG workforce, task force, whatever we called it, that came up with the guidance. And I know from the UN's perspective, and ILO is obviously in that, because the UN requires us to do our financials by SDG, we were a definite constituency or subgroup within the IATI publishers that could use the sector codes or sector element to report SDGs. But it also understood that we were one of the few organizations or group of organizations that were going to be able to break down financial data to equal 100 for the SDGs. And I think, Johanna, if I remember way back, it was a matter of, do we want to arbitrarily split financial data by SDGs or just state? Because it was going to be pretty arbitrary for most publishers, again, other than the UN. What IOM is going to plan to do is do both, so that we can meet the guidance which says do it by tags, but also do it by sector. all of this is to say that we have to start wondering and questioning the size of the data files that we're getting and the redundancy of data that's in these files. You know, IOM is in the process of updating what we put out there and increasing what we do. And we're finding we're often saying the same thing in many places because, oh, you got to put it in this element here and you got to restate it again in this element. And our file got so big, we broke Cove. So I don't think we can solve it here, but I do think when it comes to version 2.4 or whatever the next version is, we kind of had to think about this because the data files are going to start to get so big that it's going to be hard to work with as a publisher and possibly as a user. I don't know, but that's where putting them in both places because we can, and in both places because we want to be consistent, at least in the tag space, means you're going to get duplication and making these files really big. And I don't know what the solution is, but it's something I think need to keep in mind and make our see if our technical people can help us with some of those solutions. And I mean technical IT folks, not schema folks. Over.
Cheers, thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and it comes into view that it is the UN who are looking to have SDGs within the sector element rather than other constituents within IATI. And where is IATI going to be aligned to? For the moment, it is, a compromise between different organizations with different needs.
And just to emphasize your point about needing to think about this as we consider potential changes in the future, I think that thinking about how the SDG data can currently be used, what's actually there and how it can actually currently be used, I think is a really important question because it's very difficult currently to as a data user to make use of the SDG data across organizations. And there are a lot of requests and a lot of discussions, of course, at the country level about trying to assess the resource allocation to SDGs, in terms of what resources have been allocated and, alignment to national development plans and this kind of thing. And so there are always lots of questions there, but I think we don't really have easy answers. And I think that, thinking about the usability now that, the guidance has been out for a while and what has actually been published and then how you can actually make use of that. And of course, there are always, potential ways that information can be processed, even if it's published in different ways to make it more usable, right? But I think that there need to be a lot more discussions on that to be able to make sure that the ways in which the information is currently published is enabling people to use the SDG data in the ways in which they need it. Going back to the chat, thank you, Gary. You've added a couple comments in here. So I think that all very good points. I'll just read a couple of them, and perhaps you would want to come in to share some additional thoughts. But one of the comments is that many of the indicators are only looking for single documents or data points, which could result in a race to the bottom. For example, can we really say it is acceptable for a major donor to have just one document in the organizational file? And I think that another comment is sort of related in that, it doesn't, that the measures don't currently involve sort of human intervention in terms of analyzing the substance of things. So maybe I'll let Amy respond to both of those first.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Gary. And yeah, I think there's going to be always an ongoing challenge with IATI, is that currently we do not have the setup to do manual checks on the data, and that role probably does not sit within the IATI technical team to do that, but rather that is on the side of data users and such as the work done by Publish What You Fund to manually check the content. What we can do from the IATI technical side is to go, how well are you? Can we look at the structure of your data? Can we see what data points you're including? But we are not in a position to make an assessment of, are you reporting accurately or correctly what is involved? So if you have further ideas about how measures could be adapted, could be increased in ways that don't involve manual checking, then we are very open to hear those methodology suggestions. What we can't do is start manual checking on all 1,400 IATI publishers on a daily basis. That is outside the scope of our data quality index and where we sit. But yeah, keen to hear ideas of what might be a better measure than just one file with it in an organization file, for example.
Yeah, thanks for taking the question, Amy. Look, and we've got a lot of sympathy with what you guys are trying to achieve here, because obviously we've been trying to do something similar for a decade. But I guess, yeah, how have you guys wrestled with that? So that first point, which was, if for some of these indicators, it's looking for a single piece of information, either a single policy marker or a single results element, whereas projects are often much more complex and often allow the publication of much richer, more numerous data. So how, I don't know if that's something you faced into yet, but how do we prevent that from ending up in a position where every publisher is publishing one thing against each indicator in order to get a green box or a gold star on the DQI? Yeah, how do we stop that from happening? I'm sorry, I don't have an answer, but the way it's currently set up, it looks like it might drive some questionable behavior. So I don't know. How have you guys wrestled with that?
I think it is something that we are still wrestling with. There is always going to be the challenge of, how do we prevent gaming of the DQI in that system? If an organization is including at least one policy marker, then I suppose we hope that is better than including no policy markers, because they are beginning to think about, actually, how can I align my data to that? I think for us, it then probably relies on data users going, actually, is this correct? Can we create those feedback loops to come back to the organization? We're not going to fix that with the Data Quality Index. Our presumption is that by including it in the index, there is more of a chance that organizations are going to be doing this mapping and reporting correctly. Certainly for organizations who are in contact with us, we can have conversations with them on it, going, hey, you're publishing this, and this is what we've seen. We can't be doing that for everyone. So yeah, if you have ideas of how, do let us know. We have not come up with an answer, but we hope we are one tool within a system or within a community to help increase data quality. This is not going to fix it by any means.
Just to add to Amy's comment, I think that, the value in having this kind of automated data quality index is it enables you to assess it like every day and in real time as publishers improve the quality of their information. It also gives a view to data users also in real time of the quality of information that an organization has published. So it's not just, the goal isn't just to create like an index, but it's also to create a set of measures that like provide useful information to data users on the quality of information that's been published. And so enabling that, it's not perfect, right? And like, definitely, as Amy said, like, welcome your inputs on how to make it more, stringent and like more useful instead of, having like one thing that we're looking at. But at the same time, it's meant to be a proxy to give people a better sense of the quality of the information that's provided. And so that's the aim, right? And like, so definitely there are improvements that could be made, but I think like from a data use perspective, there's real value in being able to assess this like automatically, because then you are constantly able to see how data quality is changing, right? And then give a view to data users as to what the quality is when they want to use the data. So, and somebody's downloading data, they want to use it for national, budget planning, they can look at this and look at some of the measures and provide, like, it'll have useful information as to the quality of the information that an organization has provided. And I think that, speaks to this issue of trust and like, that data users frequently have cited and was, discussed in the conceptualization of this data quality index, is that, we're trying to build trust also in our data users. And so I think this kind of, it's a trade-off, right? It's like, more real time and automatic, but at the same time, that does add value. I think, whereas, obviously something more substantive, also adds value in a different area and like it's, has different advantages. So just to say that. Johanna, would you like to come in?
I was just thinking, actually, I was looking at Connect and the way the consultations are organized, and because you need specific, you need comments on the specific elements, it's forcing us to provide comments on specific elements, which I understand, but it does give a very fragmented, like every time, it's a very fragmented vision of the index, and it was the same for the timeliness, and very often some of the comments were actually, we needed to comment on one element in relation to another, or we saw linkages between them, or and it just dawned on me that it would have been useful to get kind of a theory of change around that, or a vision of the user or the user need that is driving this index. And we got some of this today, and I don't think we had that before, of this notion of, well, yeah, we need this element because when we're working with governments, where they're asking for this and they're asking for that, and the users need this and need that. And sometimes in some of the responses that we received on the previous one, we were told, well, users need this. Well, we haven't actually seen that. Like, I'm not aware that we have seen research on the user needs, on what it is that users are frustrated with when they're looking at IATI data. And I think it would be useful to see the key drivers of, like, the implicit vision behind the way the index has been built. It would help us understand why certain elements are there, or why they're the way they are, and perhaps help us then formulate comments and drive in this direction, or perhaps question some of those implicit, the model, or some of those needs, or come up with alternatives if we're pushing back on an element. So just a suggestion, because sometimes I feel that I don't really understand what we're trying to achieve, and why we're suggesting certain things, and yeah, and I feel that some of the comments could be perhaps more useful. Amy's like, yeah, don't know about that.
No, I can definitely see your point, Anna. I think data use is a challenge in IATI, and so much of, this is where we come from, is from conversations with individual organizations trying to use that data. So in terms of being able to present, going, hey, here is a record of every time this has been asked for, is something that we don't have. But it's, that challenge of how can we begin to communicate without naming names, and being able to condense that into a way that makes it understandable and makes that vision more apparent. So Sarah, it's probably something we can take away and think about.
Because otherwise, I mean, and it happened in the previous round, we're told, well, users need that. And we're like, which users? Because actually for us as donors or as publishers, X makes no sense. So if you're telling us that users need that, it would be nice to get, to hear a bit more about that. It, not necessarily naming users, but actually understanding a bit more the actual use case, because from our perspective, we don't really understand why they would need that, or why they would expect the data to be a certain way.
Yeah, so happy to respond on this and definitely understand your point. I think that there's a lot of information, and I think that that information, in terms of what users need, we have a ton of information. There's been a ton of research done. There's probably 40 documents on users of IATI data and what information they need. And in the past couple of years, we have tried to engage data users to communicate those needs and identify data quality issues that are impeding their use of the data. At the last VCE, we had partner country governments, presenting on, the data fields that they needed, and, quality issues they were encountering with the data. In the first round of the consultation, we did include an objective explanation. But to your point, perhaps that could have been more robust to specifically explain a bit more detail. But I think the challenge is that there's just so much information in IATI, and this information is out there, right? We as the Secretariat, understand user needs and the broad range of user needs, right? There's a lot of research on this. We engage day to day with data users. It's our job to understand that, right? But communicating that out, is really critical. So I hear your point, and we will continue to try to do better. I mean, I think we've done better in the past couple of years, but still seems like there's a ways to go in making sure that the community fully understands. I think also the challenge is that in consultations like this, we only have typically donor organizations or publishers engaging in the consultation. We've made efforts to get data users to engage, but you have to have some expertise in the standard to be able to understand the details of this methodology, right? And I think that it's still difficult unless you're an expert data user, right? Somebody who builds tools with the IATI data, or it's hard for just an average data user that we support to like, you know, analyze health resources to engage in this consultation and then explain why we need something, right? But from the publisher side, it's very easy for you to say like, you know, to like understand it in a different way because you're the ones who provide the data. So I think, you know, I think we're all aware that this is a constant challenge in IATI is getting like data users to engage in these kinds of consultations and share their voice. But I think that it's also because as a data user, you know, a lot of times you're interested only in that, you know, like aggregated, what is the resource flow and health in these 6 countries and what did it target and this kind of thing. And so then like diving down into this level of detail and understanding what needs to change here in order to make that end product of data that you're trying to use more useful is very difficult. But definitely hear your points and you know, something we will continually try to do better on.
I don't want to cut off this great conversation because I think this is really useful and fruitful, but just aware that we're just over time now. I want to be respectful of everyone's time and also the interpreters. So just wanted to provide some quick closing comments. So thank you again to everyone for participating today. I think this was a really useful webinar. I know we didn't get to every single comment in the chat box. So we will definitely be responding to the ones that we missed. As we did last time, we developed kind of like an FAQ document, making sure that we could respond to everything. We'll work on that over the next couple of days, and we'll be circulating that as well, along with a recap of this webinar and the recordings as well. So we'll circulate that to everyone that registered, and also, you know, be posting that on Connect. So please do look out for that, especially if you didn't get all of your questions answered today. We'll definitely try to get that done for you via the FAQ document. So thank you so much again for engaging. And we look forward to receiving all these comments on Connect, even the ones that we discussed today. Super useful to put it out there so that others outside of this webinar can also engage with those questions and comments. So thank you so much again, and hopefully we'll see you on Connect and in the next webinar. So have a good day, everyone. Bye.